Hi, I'm Fernando Pereira, and today I will introduce to you the work done by Rodothea and Myrsini as a requirement to obtain the degree of PhD in computer science. Rodothea's work deals with software security. However, she approached the topic under a level that is of particular interest to me, that of the compiler. In this regard, I will start this overview by citing an open source book on the topic, that's Low-Level Software Security for Compiler Developers. Just like most of the books, LL Security has a table of contents. The executive table is material to the presentation, except that Rodothea's work provides solutions to some of these topics. She focuses on two particular topics, which are code reuse attacks and timing side channels. These are two subjects that are dear to me, for I have worked on them in the past. I will start with timing side channels, for that's easier to explain. We say that a program is operation invariant if it fetches always the same sequence of instructions, regardless of secret data that it uses. And we say that the program is data invariant if it accesses the same sequence of addresses in the data cache, regardless of secret inputs. As an example, this program is neither data nor operation invariant. Depending on secret, we can branch out of the loop earlier, so no operation invariance. And if we terminate the loop earlier, then we don't read the same data, so no data invariance. Perhaps the first really principled approach to eliminate automatically time-based side channels is due to the work of Johann Agate. Agate proposed something called constant resource programming. His technique would fill out the different branches of a conditional test with instructions that cost the same number of cycles. However, a few people already knew problems with resource constant programming. In particular, Meng Wu has demonstrated using Gem5 that it was possible to obtain secret data in a program automatically transformed using Agate's technique. Then he proposed automatic techniques to make programs operation invariant. And yet, his technique had problems with memory safety. For instance, this invariant that if the two arrays differ in the first position implies that they have length equal to 1 will cause Wu's linearization to provoke bad memory accesses. I claim that we have solved Wu's problem in 2021, finding a correct way to linearize programs without causing invalid memory allocation. However, our linearization technique could not deal with loops, only if the loops were fully unrollable. But then came Constantine, a technique that Rodothea mentions in her work that could deal with loops. But Constantine is a dynamic analysis. Every branch must be exercised by inputs. And worse, it requires running all the iterations of the loop during the dynamic analysis. More recently, we have been able to implement control flow linearization for programs with loops. The paper came out this year. However, our approach still requires the linearized loop to have at least one exit, controlled exclusively by public inputs. Well, now let's talk about the second problem that Rodothea's work addresses. That's a general class of software attacks called code reuse attacks. In this case, the attacker wants to take control of a program by exploiting a sequence of instructions that terminate with the return opcode. These sequences are called gadgets. The idea of this kind of attack is that if a binary program is sufficiently large, we can find many gadgets within its binary code. Then the attacker can chain a sequence of addresses of gadgets into a corrupted stack, forcing their execution. Although it sounds a bit like science fiction, there has been reports of high-profile software exploits that apparently were using ROP-based techniques to carry out attacks. Most of the academic interest on ROP came from a paper published by Yoav Shashan in 2007. Today, he is a professor at UC San Diego, still working with software security. In contrast to side channel elimination, the previous problem that I mentioned, ROP has seen much more industrial interest, and today there are mitigations for ROP attacks at different levels, including the compiler, the operating system, and the computer architecture. Most of these solutions are nowadays available in standard tools, be them operating systems, processors, or compilers. If you want to take a look into an in-depth analysis of the performance costs of these different techniques, I suggest you a paper that we wrote on the topic a few years ago. Yet, like most software security issues, ROP is always an arms race. So in 2015, Nicholas Carlini showed how to circumvent standard control flow integrity techniques implemented at the compiler's level. But in spite of Carlini's stance, it's most likely that current ROP exploits can only work in some very specific scenarios that involve old versions of compilers, operating systems, and architectures. At least, that was the impression that I had upon talking with Michalis Polychronakis, a professor at Stony Brook, who has long worked on this topic of code reuse attacks. We have not heard of many recent exploits based on code reuse neither. Most of the demonstrations of possible attacks happen in the restricted environment of research artifacts. But that does not mean that these attacks are not really happening. Anyway, that brings me to the topic of this presentation. It's the work of Rodothea that she wants to use to get the PhD degree. I believe that if I had to synthesize her work into a single word, that would be unification. There have been many unifying frameworks throughout the history of compilers. I could cite, for instance, Kildall's Dataflow Framework, or Cousseau and Cousseau's Abstract Interpretation, or Citron's SSA Form, and many other ideas that take different disciplines within the science of compilers and then bind them into a cohesive body. In her work, Rodothea uses constraint-based programming, an idea that was probably inspired by the work of Roberto Castaneda. But whereas Castaneda was interested in code optimization problems, Rodothea is concerned with software security. And then she uses this unified framework based on constraints to show how to strengthen code against side channel leaks and code reuse attacks. In this context, she comes up with the notion of a combinatorial compiler, which is a tool that extracts constraints from the source code of a program. A general solver can then solve these constraints guided by some objective function. Notice that many solutions are possible and optimality is defined by the primary goal of the compiler. Optimality might be to equalize the number of instructions into different paths that come out of a branch, for instance, or to increase the distance between code to strengthen the binary against code reuse attacks. And so, she has designed a principled, modular, and viable technique to generate secure code. And with that, I conclude my presentation.